I'm Cesar Rodriguez, and this is
Police Agne.
And we are working with Belleville East High School for a veteran project. Here we are, March 24th, at Stan Agne's house.
That's right.
When were you born, Stan?
In August of 1928.
What war were you in, and what branch of service were you in?
It was the Korean War, and I was in the Army, and I was attached to the Air Force the last, it'll be about the last 16 months that I was in.
What rank were you?
I started private nothing, and I was a staff sergeant when I got out.
Okay, cool. And where did you serve?
I started at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then went to engineering school at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and then I went to Korea.
Okay. And were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
And where were you living at the time that you were drafted?
I was living on a farm south of Belleville, just down the road about a quarter of a mile.
And do you recall like your first days in the service?
Yeah, we went to St. Louis. That's where we were inducted. Then went by train to Fort Leonard Wood, and it was in January. It was cold. We had a lot of snow, and we had a lot of sleet, and a lot of rain. All the while we were there. Very little, really good weather.
Okay. And do you have to go to boot camp, and what do you do for training and everything?
Well, we had standard basic training, which was the same training for everybody, and that was 6 weeks. And then the next 8 weeks, they had advanced training, and that was for an armored infantry battalion, which was basically artillery training, things of that nature. Most of it was walking. They walked everywhere. Yeah.
Okay. And do you remember any of your instructors? Was anybody like particularly special? Like.
Yeah. The one we had was a Corporal Thornton, and he was a kind of a mix of German Gestapo and John Wayne. If you can imagine that, but that's what he was. He was a good soldier. He was really big, tall, and good soldier, but tough. That's the way he was.
And how did you get through everything, all the training? Was it really difficult?
Yeah, the only bad part I had was that I got measles when I was down there. But I didn't go on sick call. I maybe made a mistake there, but I didn't want to leave the outfit because there was 51 of us from the same draft call, which incidentally was the biggest draft call out of that board ever. Even during World War II, they never had one that big. The armed forces were desegregated in 1948, but they didn't all the camps didn't do that immediately. And as they got drafted, we were the very last all-white battalion formed down at Fort Leonard Wood. Celeste's brother stayed in St. Louis because he had to have another physical examination. He came down the next morning when he went into a desegregated group that was some colored, but we had one colored man in our outfit that got drafted, and when we got to Fort Leonard Wood, they took him off of the bus separately and put him in a black company. So we were the last white company to be formed down there.
So where were you stationed during like the actual?
In Korea.
Do you remember where in Korea?
Oh yeah. Actually, I was at a base at Taegu, I stayed there for about 2 months, and then I was transferred to Wanju, and I was there till March of '52, and then I was sent to Kang Nung. I stayed there till May, middle of May, and then I went to Kimpo Airstrip, which was near Seoul. So, and they're all set up separately in there too.
What was your job or assignment during the war?
Well, I was a heavy equipment operator, and that's what I went to school at Fort Belvoir for. And what we basically did, when I got to California, I was reassigned, and I was attached to the Air Force, because the Air Force in 1947, the Air Force separated from the Army. It used to be the Army Air Force, but when they separated, all the engineers stayed in the Army. And when the Korean War started, the Air Force had no engineers to build roads, to build airstrips or anything. And they formed this group that I was in. It was a Skarwolf group. It was a special category with Army. That's what the Skarwolf stood for. And that's all we did, was build airstrips, repair them, build the infrastructure around them, the roads and stuff that's necessary to operate them.
What were your thoughts during most of the war?
What was what?
What were most of your thoughts?
Mostly of getting home. And try to get through the next day. We had, actually the weather wasn't too bad. We really had like 2 weeks of really, really bad weather. The rest was pretty good. Much the same as it is here. Tolerable, but not too bad.
Okay. And what were some of your locations during your experience?
What was what?
Some of your locations.
Well, the first permanent assignment I had was at Taegu. That's a pretty big town. I always thought that these towns were small, even all the while I was over there. But when I got back, I started reading up on some of that stuff, and I really never got to town. We were always stationed outside, at the airstrips. But I thought these were just little birds, but they were 800,000 to more than 1 million people in these towns.
And what was some of the land like? Like, how was the geography where you were?
There were mountains and rice paddies, and basically that was it. There were trees on these mountains, but not many large trees at all. It was just mostly scrub trees. You'll see in those pictures too that there probably isn't a picture of a large tree in the whole bit.
And was there like combat around there, or?
Well, they had 3 ranges, and your rotation came up 1 point, or 2 points, 3 points, and 4. 2 points was supply area, and 3 was what they called direct combat support, and 4 was frontline duty, and I was in 3. And that's 3 was the amount of points you got for each month you served. Those that had 2 points would have to put in 18 months, and those that had 3 would put in a year, and those that had 4 points that served on the front line, they only had to serve 9 months.
Okay, and just in the combat situation, did the geography play a role in the fighting or anything?
Oh yeah, and there was only about 2 roads that led north and south in Korea. And of course, these were usually the battle lines. It'd spill over, but nonetheless, that was the portion that you tried to protect. And the roads were basically, they were through mountains, but you can imagine they stayed in low areas. So a lot of the battles were for a specific mountain where you had a advantage to watch over the road. And places they call them, they had like White Horse Mountain and Pork Chop Hill and stuff like that, you know. They had names for all that, but those were basically the battle areas. But Seoul City, which was the capital, changed hands 4 times. There wasn't much of it left when it was done. It was originally occupied by the South, and the North took it, and the South took it, and the North took it, and the South took it again. 4 times it changed hands. So it was pretty much of a mess.
So do you think that the enemy had a geographical advantage in battle at all, or?
Not really. They didn't have, the only advantage they had was the amount of troops. Their equipment was antique. A lot of them fought with clubs, but just thousands and thousands of them. Unbelievable. You know, most times American forces were outnumbered at least 5 to 1, sometimes 10 and 15 to 1. But we had the equipment, they had the troops. And they weren't really capable of having a sustained battle because they didn't have the methods to keep food and supplies up for that many people. They didn't have the transportation to get it there. They didn't have the food and stuff and ammunition for them, even if they got it there. You know, they just didn't. So that was an advantage for us. And the longer the war lasted, the bigger that advantage became.
Yeah. They started running out of everything.
Yes.
So, what was life in the service like?
Well, I spent 3 weeks in a Quonset hut when I was away. The rest of the time I slept in a tent. Most of the time the tents had floors in them, but they were for 10 men. And they called those squad tents. There's 9 men in a squad plus a squad leader, so there was 10 men in each tent. But for about 3 weeks, we were stationed on a mountain, and that was just strictly dirt floor. There was no facilities there. No. As long as we were with the company, you'd have outside toilets where they built a building, but up there you just dug a hole, you know. There was a bathroom. You washed in the helmet for 3 weeks. That was it. You know. Got a picture of it. It's pretty desolate. You'll see that in there.
How did most people entertain themselves?
Well, there really wasn't much. The biggest entertainment was probably they had the American Armed Forces radio service over there, and listened to the radio. They played a lot of country music, a lot of modern music, but that was a big entertainment. I think I saw 2 movies while I was over there, and got to a place where they had a metal shed big enough to give one of those movies.
Do you remember what they were?
I don't really remember what the movie. I guess I should, but I don't. We did have Danny Kaye come over there. I was with you probably don't remember him, but he was a movie comedian, but he came over. He also did a good job of singing. But there was just him and a girl and about 4 musicians. But they put on shows for just thousands of people at a time. They'd set up a little stage and everybody just line up on a mountainside, and that's where you were sitting. And they had entertainment, yeah.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Well, I wrote letters home every day, except for when I was actually on the move. But I wrote a letter to somebody every day. Mostly I'd write to Celeste probably 6-7 times a week, and then to one of my brothers or sisters or my mother, I'd write every week, you know.
Sorry.
That took up a lot of my time as far as entertainment goes. So,
do you have any like big stories that you remember, like main ones that stick out in your mind?
well, you call almost getting hit by airplanes stories. Yeah, a couple of those. I had one that crashed that stopped within 60 feet of where I was. That was a little harrowing. And there was quite a few of them crashed where I was. And 2 of them were pretty close calls. So, and most of the time, if I had any close calls, that's what it came from our own airplanes, not from somebody else's. We had no trouble with enemy airplanes coming over. They just didn't want to have anything to do with our Air Force. We would go up there every day, but they didn't come back.
And Grandma said something about how you got locked in a railroad car for 3 days or something.
4.
Really?
Yeah, 4 days I was locked in it, yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, they put me on guard at that's where I was Pusan. I went on a temporary duty, and I went on that car about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were supposed to come and relieve me at 8 o'clock. I was just supposed to be on there 4 hours. But in the meantime, they moved the freight car in the freight area. They came down there, the car was gone, so they supposed that I had left. But I wasn't, I was still there, and so I had to sleep in that car that night. And this was in late October or early November. I'm not sure which. But I did have my overcoat, and they had all kinds of burlap in it, so I decided to stay in the car overnight. And somebody came and locked the door from the outside while I was there. So all the while that the car was in transport, I was locked inside of it, and nobody around, you know. The car would stop somewhere. I didn't know where I was, but it would stop somewhere. They only had one track, so the train would have to pull off on the side rail to let another one come by, and then and the trains were very slow. I mean, about 15 miles an hour was top speed. So it took me 4 days to get to where I was going. But when I got back to Taegu, I did make a phone call back to the company. That's where they were stationed, to get some relief. That was the 3rd night. They said, well, they'll send somebody right out there. Well, they didn't get there in time. I did get out of that car, by the way. I heard some GIs talking. We were pulled off to the side, and I heard some GIs talking, and I hollered out at them, and they came over there. They said, well, you know, it's locked. We can't get it open. Well, this just so happened that I had a bunch of barbed wire and burlap and there was some big old 6-foot crowbars there, so I knocked a hole in the side of the car. So they had the crowbar, and then they knocked the lock off with that crowbar. That was the first drink I got in 3 days. They had some hot water up in the cab of the diesel engine, and I had some hot chocolate and a sea ration. Best drink ever. Ever.
And do you recall the day that your service ended?
Yeah, I went back to Texas. That's where they stationed me when I come home. And there was nothing colossal about it. They just turned you loose and never even had transportation out of the base. I just took the duffel bag and caught a bus, and I went into Fort Worth. And Celeste had a cousin lived there, and I went to see them and spent a day with them and got on the train and headed back.
And, did you work or did you go back to school?
No, I went back to work. I think I was just home about a week or two when I went back to work.
And did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Oh yeah. Still keep in touch with 3 of them. And one of them, the one that was closest to me and that I spent the most time with, he died, I believe, in 1998. He passed away. But I did get up to see him in 1996. That was the last time I saw him. But we were together all the time. We spent 24 hours a day together for 6 months. Didn't make any difference where we were together. I was on 1, 2, 3 different detachments that they send you away from the company. In fact, I was only with the company 3 months out of the time I was there. The rest of the time, the biggest detachment I was in was like 18 men, sometimes only 6 men. We'd go out and work on a job by ourselves. That was it.
So what did you do after the war? What was your career?
Oh boy. I had a lot of different jobs. I worked for a farm equipment dealer till 1958. And then I worked as a parts manager for a Lincoln Mercury dealer for 5 years. In 5 years I was a representative for a paint company, and after that I went into roofing sales, and I stayed in that the rest of the time, 21 years in that.
How did your military experience influence the rest of your life?
Well, the way it really influences was that I always wanted to do what I did back in the service, but I was never able to get a job. The engineers were very, very difficult to get into, and I could only get part-time work, and I couldn't afford to do that. I couldn't afford to just work 2 days a week, or just whenever they, if I could have gotten a union, that'd have been fine, but I could never crack that, so I just had to let it sit. But I'd sooner rather done that than anything.
Do you attend any reunions?
They do have a reunion every year for Scarwoff people, but I've looked over the roster, and they have them all over the country, but I've never seen anybody that attended from our company, so I've never bothered to go.
So what was your best memory of your service?
Probably getting out. You know, the thing about it is, And I've told the kids that there's certain things that you'd never forget. When we left Tokyo on the boat, the minute they sound that whistle, that, you know, you're going home. But that's something that other people never get to feel. In the same way when you come in and see that Golden Gate. It wasn't near as impressive when I got to St. Louis and landed. Everything kind of got screwed up, and I expected everybody to be out in the airstrip. You got to understand that the airplanes just landed out in the field, and there was no area there that you came in, no gates or anything. You walked off the airplane with steps, and the people come out to see you right when the airplane landed, you know. So, at any rate, the typical situation was we had changed planes twice coming back, and they missed the first exchange at Texas. They missed the second one at Kansas City. So they're waiting there at the airport. I was supposed to get in at 11 o'clock, and I think it was like 1 when I finally got there. And there was nobody out there to meet the plane. I got off the plane, there wasn't a single person out there. But I went into the building, and there's a picture in there of the building. There was nothing there. It was just I'd compare it to a building about the size of the Central High School it used to be, or Central Grade School used to be out on South Illinois Street. You just walked in there, and that was the whole compound over there. But there was Celeste and Mom and a bunch sitting on a wooden bench, you know, just waiting for my flight to come in. And they're looking for a flight from California, and I'm coming in from Kansas City. They don't know it. And they couldn't tell them up there. There was no communication, you know, like there is today. They didn't know where I was either. So there was a little confusion there, but then we got together. But they were more surprised, you know. I guess that kind of took them off guard a little bit.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this interview?
No, but I think that the military service was good for me. They always say you'd never want to do it again, and that's probably true, but I wouldn't trade that. And if I had to do something in the service, there was nothing I would sooner do than what I did.
Well, I guess that concludes the interview, and I thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.